Okay. Hi, Shana. Nice to meet you, or nice to see you again. I'm really excited that we're able to have this conversation and hear a little bit about the work that you guys are doing. I know that I was super inspired and really interested to hear all about your stories and your anecdotes, and I would love to share that with a little bit of a broader audience. So could you just introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about the work of Magen and what you guys are doing?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Shana Aaronson. I am the Director of Magen, or Magen for Jewish Communities, if you the full official name. And Magen, basically, our mission is to deal with and address sexual abuse, primarily within the religious community, kind of as holistically and as broadly as possible. And what I mean by that is we kind of focus on the issue from a few different perspectives. First of all, is awareness and education. So we do quite a bit of work in just creating, whether it's educational tools and resources, or helping connect, kind of serving as a hub to help connect parents, educators with educational resources that they need. So that's one thing that we do, as well as events, as well as educational programs for parents, things of that nature. And then we have our mental health services department, where we offer kind of everything in the area of mental health as it relates to sexual abuse. So referrals for therapy. We do not do therapy in Magen, but we refer to therapists and to clinics and organizations all over the country. We help connect survivors with the mental health services that they need. So we work with a foundation that funds therapy for survivors that can't afford it. We do all the case management for that program, for the survivors that are in need, and just kind of helping people access the mental health help that they need. And we also have a number of support groups for victims of sexual abuse, both in Hebrew and in English, female, male. We have, we're starting a trauma-focused yoga group for women. We have a group for women who are ex-wives of abusers, of men who were convicted of sexually abusing children. And we also have a group for mothers of victims of abuse.
Oh, that's
and
so
we're always
interesting,
looking.
that group. Sorry to interrupt you. That group that you just said about
Sure.
ex-wives of convicted abusers, that is fascinating. I've never heard of a support group like that before. And I always think about those wives because they're really victims in some way as well. How did you guys
Absolutely.
discover the need for that? Because they're victims, but not in the classic sense. They're a different kind of victim. How did you
Yeah,
realize the
absolutely.
need for that?
Well, I think we had there were like 3 or 4 women in that position that we had kind of been supporting on a one-on-one basis. They were in touch with our staff. We were kind of guiding them through the process. Some of them had, a few of them had really gone through. In fact, I can think of 3 where we were really front and center for their own process, they're kind of witnessing their process from where they first found out, and were totally in denial. There's no way this is true. This is a false allegation. Even one, I remember telling me when I first met her, my husband was falsely convicted. And I was like, okay, I don't know the details of your husband's case. And then sort of as it evolved to the clarity of oh my God, this is not fake. And I've been seeing these warning signs. How did I not pick up on them? Or once I picked up on them, why didn't I do something sooner? There's a lot of guilt and confusion. And then just the reality of, we're talking about these women are now in a position of being single moms with their ex-husband in jail, and the social stigma that comes with that. So there's certainly a need of support. And it's also sensitive because they might, they have different feelings about how much they want to share with the community. Sometimes the community knows and sometimes they don't. And then they have their children to think about, just because they're comfortable sharing this with the community, that doesn't mean that their children want everyone to know what their father is in jail for. It's very, very sensitive.
Super
And
multifaceted. There are so
yes,
many sensitivities involved. Wow, that is
really, really, yes. So we thought if we can start to connect these women together, maybe they can support each other in a way that other people can't really understand, and they can maybe share things there that they wouldn't be able to share with anyone else.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
So you've run multiple groups like this.
Yes, yes. And we have, at the moment, it's a WhatsApp group where they're with a facilitator where they're all on that group, and they can kind of be in touch and share the highs, the lows. And thank God there are, life does move on. And a few of them have recently made bar mitzvahs for their children. And of course, that had its own challenges of, which I mean, challenges in terms of not unlike any person who's in a position of being a single parent, and is obviously a challenge to make a simcha on their own. But then you have this like added piece of like this, the ex is in jail, and what does that mean for them, for the kid? Yeah, it's very, very challenging, but we've got to really kind of be with them through that process.
And the facilitators are your staff or they're social workers? Like, what's the support there from Magen?
So our staff most of our groups are facilitated by either a member of our like immediate staff or a member of sort of our extended staff. So people that are kind of on a more part-time basis that only run the groups. And they're all either, I mean, it ranges. Our staff are all either social workers, criminologists, psychologists, educational guidance counselor, and family therapist. I mean, there's all different sorts of like background and training that we have on our team. And most of the, I think the facilitators of the groups are social workers, if I kind of go through all of them, but they're mental health professionals of some kind or another in a relevant field. The last kind of area of focus is our investigations and advocacy, basically. So we support and advocate for victims through the law enforcement proceedings and process. So victims will contact us. And sometimes it's sort of like, from the very first question of I just found out that this is going on, what do I do? And explaining the mandated reporting that might apply here, to guiding them through the police process, through the courts, through finding a lawyer if they need one, whether it's civil litigation or a beit din, if that's the path that the victim has chosen to go down. Sometimes it means working with the media on investigative like exposés in cases where law enforcement has unfortunately not been a successful avenue for warning the community or keeping the community safe. So we do some private investigation work, but that's basically in collaboration with either the police or the media.
Wow. And they view you here as like an extra arm or a resource to really support their activities. Like what's your place with them specifically?
So we are officially, we're a Merkaz Siyua. So the state of Israel has, we're the 12th. So we're 12 crisis centers. I think they're officially called like rape crisis centers that deal with supporting victims of sexual abuse. So they have them throughout the country. Some specifically work with men, some specifically work with women. Our specialty is working with the Haredi community. And I say specialty because obviously anybody that reaches out to us from anywhere across, the community, like anyone will certainly help them get to the right place. But the majority of our clients are from the ultra-Orthodox and Orthodox community. So
sorry, could you go back? I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you just explain a little bit like the government mandate? Like you're an official government wing to work with these victims? Is that how?
Not really. It's the way that it works is we're considered a Merkaz Siyua, so that does give you a certain like legitimate status in terms of, first of all, the courts allow, like by law, victims have a right to bring somebody who is somebody from a Merkaz Siyua in with them to court, even if the courtroom is sealed, so to speak, like it's a closed courtroom. So there are certain things like that. And we also part of our mental health like services, so some of our like part of our support groups and part of our educational programming, things like that are partially funded by the Rivacha, by social services, meaning we're not an actual government office, but we do receive some funding from the Rivacha for those particular projects. The investigation work that we do is not part of the official Merkaz Siyua mandate. That's something that we do that I think is basically completely unique to Magen. I'm not aware of anyone else who does that work. And how does that play in? I mean, I think it's confusing. I think the police sometimes don't really know like what to do with us. But over the years, we've developed like real really positive relationships with a lot of different like detectives and offices and all over the country. So there are we've had situations in more recent years where the police have reached out to us for help on certain
Wow.
cases where of fugitives, for example, that they were not able to find. In most cases, it had to do with fugitives. That's kind of another one of our specialties.
That
Which
is
again, it's not.
amazing. That is amazing that they reach out to you. That I think
Yes.
says a ton about, how much influence you have in the field and how much you are a resource for them and the positive work experiences that they've had with you in the past. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first time that it happened, it was kind of surreal. I was a little bit like, wait, what? What's happening? And there's a part of me that does acknowledge there's some frustration that this is necessary, that the police don't have better resources, access, whatever. Like, why would we be doing this? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. We're a nonprofit organization. And it's not like we have access to some kind of crazy resources, far from it. The police obviously have far more than we do. But what we do have are community connections. And a lot of the investigation work that we do is really, really just comes down to like good old Jewish geography. It's like calling a friend who knows a cousin who has a shadchanit, whose brother knows X. And like, yeah, that's usually how it works.
Fascinating. That's really fascinating. How did you get involved in this work? Like what's your professional history? Is there any sort of like specific incident that inspired this work for you? I would love to hear more about that.
So this was sort of like an evolution for me, and the truth is, Magen, as it is today, was also very much an evolution. This wasn't something that I kind of went into intentionally. It just sort of happened. I really wanted to work with teens, like with at-risk teens, and that's what I was doing. I got my bachelor's in psychology, and I was working in a residential. I was working as the assistant director while I was finishing my degree, as the assistant director of a residential program for girls at risk. And sexual abuse, and I mean, it was probably 85% at least of our students were survivors of sexual abuse, usually either incest or rape. I mean, really severe. And it was like, it just kept coming up. And it was something that I had seen a lot. I saw it growing up myself, like from my own experiences growing up in the community that I did, which was the Haredi community. And I remember like at 14 already speaking to friends about the fact that it didn't make sense to me that this was something that was so prevalent. Like, why isn't, like, it's so weird that like everybody we know was sexually abused and nobody ever talks about it. And I remember discussing how strange that is. And then, so I was working in that program. The program unfortunately closed down. And I started volunteering for at the time, fairly new small organization in Beit Shemesh that was supporting families whose children had been abused. They dealt with abuse at a more like broad level. So physical violence in school, sexual abuse. And I started off there kind of interning, volunteering, and then as a case manager. And then from there, I mean, it just sort of, like I said, evolved. I kind of fell into it, but it has been very, it very quickly became something that it was always very important to me, but I never really thought of dealing with it from this perspective. To be honest, I don't think I ever really thought that I could, because at the time, again, when I was a teenager, I remember seeing the stickers at some point during my teen years, like the stickers for the rape crisis centers, and thinking like, I want to do something like that, because that clearly was really, really necessary, but not really knowing what that meant. So somehow I ended up here.
Wow. Wow. What a journey. I'm actually like surprised to hear that in your experience growing up, your friends were so openly talking about, not openly, but that you had this experience growing up where you heard from peers about this going on. Um,
Yeah,
it sounds like they were
a
very
lot.
brave. Yeah, I personally didn't have that experience. I'm sure that it existed, but it's not something that I heard on the street growing up as much. So, that must have really been formative for you.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about a time that you were inspired by recent work at Magen, a story, an experience that you guys had, a success that felt that you guys were in a unique position to really impact change here?
Um, Definitely we've had a few that, oh man, actually a lot. I mean, sometimes there are days that will go by where it feels like, oh my gosh, like it's really hard work. And the successes, I mean, obviously depending on how you define success, but they're often few and far between, meaning it takes a long time until you see the success. We can work on a case for anywhere between a few months to years before we actually see any major breakthrough. So it is important to celebrate those, and they really, definitely, a lot of them stand out in my mind. We recently had an arrest on a case that was very, very meaningful to me. The mother of the boy that had been abused, now young man, she had originally reached out to me when he was 12 years old, and it was just a hellish situation. They ended up moving out of the city that they lived in because the abuser was he was a very close friend and neighbor of the chief rabbi of the city, who didn't want the case going public. So there was a tremendous amount of pressure against the whole family. The father, unfortunately, had taken the side of the abuser, and the parents ended up getting divorced, and the mother moved out of the city, and with their 6 children. And the oldest son was he was the one who had been sexually abused, and he was in really bad shape. And over the years, I mean, like, there are just certain moments of that case, because really I've been in touch with them at this point for like 7 years. So there have been times where I really questioned, are we ever going to see anything of this case? It was very difficult because I remember the first time I met him in person when he was 14. He was 14 at that point, and up until then I had just been in touch with him by phone. And I met him, and he was such a little boy, and he was so sad. Like, you could just, everything, his eyes, like, he just looked like he was just this kid who would never smile again. And it was really devastating. And over the years, I remember his mother calling me, and there were times where, like, he went through very dark times where she was afraid that, like, he wouldn't make it, and that he was going to hurt himself, or, like, it was really, really challenging. Thank God he found a school that was fantastic for him, like a therapeutic program, and he did a lot of work. And about 2 years ago, he called me to invite me to go to his high school reunion, to his high school, I'm sorry, his high school graduation. He wanted me to, like, and we had this little, like, reunion there of myself and the social worker from the Rivaha that had actually been his, like, contact person when this whole process started, and his mother, and it was very emotional. And then a few months later, he called me out of nowhere, and he said that he had decided to confront his abuser. He literally just showed up at his house, and he said he knocked on the door, and he said to him, you don't remember me, like, you're not going to remember me, but you hurt me really badly when I was 12 years old, and I want you to know that I'm going to be okay. Like, you have to live with the fact that you did this to me, but I'm going to make sure that I'm okay. And he just walked away. And I was completely, like, it was just unbelievable. And then last year, we got a phone call. Unfortunately, what had happened was we did go to the police, and it took them like 4 years. And then finally the police were like, it's been too long, which was because of them. And they ended up closing the case because they said there was not, insufficient evidence, which is the reason that cases are usually closed. And they told us that if we ever hear about another victim, we should bring them forward, because we could really push to get the case reopened. That's not standard, that if another victim comes forward, they'll reopen the original case, but we could really push for it. And that happened. Last year, another victim reached out to us, and
Wait,
my intake coordinator,
no idea, like, these two
no idea.
Wow.
No, nothing to do with each other.
And only
And
because of you guys, you were able
called,
to connect the dots. Like, you guys served as
yeah,
the connector here. Wow.
yes,
Unbelievable.
yeah. So he was indicted, the abuser in this case. He was indicted just a couple months ago. We fought, we went to the police, we wrote letters, we asked them to please reopen the original case. They finally agreed to. So now he's been indicted for both of those cases.
Wow. What an experience to see something come full
Yeah.
circle in that way. Wow.
Yeah.
And
But
also,
8 years, took 8 years.
wow. It also sounds like, the fact that he invited you to his graduation is also a testament to how valuable that support was for him in that situation, and how much you were instrumental as an organization in his rehabilitation. And the fact also that he shared with you that he went to his abuser's house, that was meaningful for him to share with you and also to do on his own, is a really unbelievable piece of this story, in my opinion. Wow. Very, very moving. Amazing.
He's phenomenal. He's phenomenal. I'm very much looking forward to seeing where he goes next, because he's just started now in the Army, but he's gonna go far. We're very excited to see it.
Wow. Wow. Tell me a bit about like some of the challenges that you guys face as an organization, either in fundraising or in general, how you function and how you try to get out there and work. I can imagine that with the nature and sensitivity of your work, that there are real challenges that come along with trying to advance your mission. I'd love to hear about some of the biggest ones.
Absolutely. I think that the first really has to do with the first would probably be, well, workload and staffing. So we are constantly like, it still shocks me the number of cases. We get like an average of about 40 new cases a month. That's just cases. And that doesn't include like general inquiries, which is people who just reach out for advice. We get about between 60 and 70 new inquiries every month as well. So, so that's the first challenge, is just, the workload. But that really ties into the second part, which is staffing. It's finding the right team, thank God, and then keeping them sane and healthy to be able to keep doing the work. That, for me, just as director, that's certainly very challenging, because this is work that, needless to say, could easily create a tremendous amount of burnout. And we are blessed. We've just, our team is unbelievable. They are unbelievable people, incredible professionals, really dedicated, smart, passionate about this. And so figuring out how to really care for ourselves enough that we won't be, kind of burning through within a year or two is really, really critical. And I'd say that's certainly a challenge for an organization like ours. It's hard when you're doing something, we're like, okay, once a month we do group supervision, and once a month we do one-on-one therapy, and once a month we do, but it's like, is that even enough? When you're hearing tens, like you could literally hear 10 horrific stories on any given day, like news stories, that's, how much support and therapy do you need to be able to really process that? So that's definitely a big challenge. In terms of, and I'd say obviously fundraising is a challenge, specifically with our like investigation and advocacy work. I have found that we have far less donors and foundations that want to get involved with that. Thank God we've worked hard, and our mental health services and our educational programs are, not all of them, but are really, we have fantastic donors who support a lot of those. And it's always a little bit more challenging to find people who want to get involved. And I always really, and I get it because it's kind of dirty, you know what I mean? Like in the sense of like, you're getting your hands dirty. It's definitely kind of getting in there in the muck. And it takes a certain kind of person who's really dedicated in a very certain kind of way that really wants to like jump in and get involved with that. Like, yes, this isn't going to be pretty, but we're going to do the absolute best we can to handle this in the way that is with the most integrity and respect that we possibly can, of just, the whole situation and all the sensitivities involved. But that is definitely a big challenge to find, partners in that work.
Mm-hmm. I remember when we originally spoke, you mentioned something about, and also in reference to what you just mentioned about it being kind of getting your hands dirty. You mentioned also that sometimes you have a hard time getting people to share that they are supporting this cause. Maybe I'm misremembering a little bit about what you said, but
yeah,
just
yes.
about, proudly saying that you're involved with this maybe could be a stain on yourself or on your family. I would love to hear a little bit more about your experiences with that, like how you get people willing to really promote and partner with you, and the
Yeah,
hardship.
that is I did. Yes, I did mention that. That is absolutely a challenge. Well, it's actually a two-sided challenge. First of all, obviously, it's not an organization where we have tons of people lining up to tell everyone that they were supported by the organization. So we're often in the position of sharing our, the stories of the work that we do in an anonymous fashion. Not everyone, and obviously, I don't expect that in any way, shape, or form. We completely more than respect and we hold the confidentiality and privacy of every victim, every person that reaches out to us for help in very high regard. But that sometimes can be challenging when you want to show people, okay, we're doing this great work, you should support us, but we can't tell you about any of the people that we've helped. So obviously that can pose a challenge. And then on the flip side, it is the kind of work that we do sometimes, get donors who we will have donors who reach out and they want to support, but they really want to make sure that nobody knows that they're involved, because either there's a stigma, they're afraid that people will assume that they're a victim of abuse or someone in their family was abused. Like there's a certain stigma in their particular community that this might not be, like maybe this means something about them or, or otherwise, why would they care about this? Which is kind of ridiculous because everyone should care about this. Sexual abuse affects between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 people,
That's
which means
why I
every
remember
one of us. Yes.
That's why I remember that when you said this, because it was surprising to me as well. Like, I don't really see a connection of supporting this necessarily means that you were a victim in any way. So I do find that a bit surprising. But it's interesting to hear that that's like a real challenge, which makes perfect sense. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you could tell me a little bit about some of Magen's dreams, like if you had an unlimited budget, what are some of the things that you would pursue? What are some of the next steps for the organization that you would really tackle?
Oh my gosh. So in terms of, if we had an unlimited budget, there are so many things, so many unbelievable things that we would love to do. One dream that we have is like a really big office space that could also serve as like a support center for victims. We were involved with organizing after the Chaim Walder case broke, and then after the subsequent, after one of his victims, Shifra Horowitz, committed suicide. There were a number of organizations, and we were one of the first organizations that started organizing that. Ohel Nechama, we called it. It was like the mourner's tent, but the tent of comfort. It was just a space for victims of sexual abuse because the whole situation was so traumatic and triggering for everybody, whether they knew Walder or didn't know Walder, but just had been abused or had been exposed to abuse in some other way. It was incredibly painful and traumatic on a communal level. So really, it was a space for people to get together and just process. And everyone that walked away from that week, we went on for a week, and we all just thought, we wish that one day we could have a space like this, like a permanent space.
I love the idea, the Ohel Nechama, like really mimicking the Shiva that was so, they got so many comments about, and that same type of concept in Judaism of how we support ourselves as a community. You guys really took that and implemented it in an effective way for these victims. What a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it was very, very special. I think another project which I have recently has become like my dream is an actual a kind of a separate kind of sub project of Magen to offer support, but a specific kind of support, like resources for families who have had children who were abused. And some specific examples of that, I've sort of been thinking about and looking at a lot of organizations, mainstream organizations that deal with issues in the Jewish community that at this point have become so mainstream, but that really started off with a tremendous amount of stigma. For example, supporting families who have children who are terminally ill, or God forbid, or supporting families who have children who have special needs, various disabilities. That's something that, it's so hard at this point. It's so mainstream, and the stigma has, thank God, like really just dissipated to the point that it's we don't even think about it anymore, but not that many years ago, there was a tremendous stigma associated with having a child with special needs, or in terms of, the families didn't want to, people wouldn't consider shidduchim with somebody where there was a family. I mean, things that are now we just look at as so ridiculous. But now there are all these organizations that, like, if a family, God forbid, has a child who's really sick, so there will be programs not only for that child, but there will be summer camps for the siblings of that child. There's this acknowledgement of the ripple effects that trauma, sort of casts into a family. And we see the same kinds of dynamic when a child in a family is sexually abused. In the original days, weeks after the parents find out, there can be there's this break that happens of just the shock and horror, and like the world stops, and they're dealing with, whatever it is, the medical visits, the assessments, the police, the social services, and they're like, the family's falling apart. Again, I don't want to compare, because you never want to compare, tragedies, but it's horrific, and it certainly casts tremendous weight over the family. And I've had families describe to me how for like 2 weeks, this mother said to me, I don't know what my children ate. Like, I didn't make dinner the entire 2 weeks. I don't know what my kids, somehow they found food, but like I wasn't feeding them. And I was just thinking, where was the community? The community knew that this was going on. Why wasn't there a meal train? So to create some of the same kind of services that we've become so accustomed to seeing in the Orthodox community for other kinds of really painful issues, if there's a death, if there's whatever, people show up, there's meals, there's somebody's arranging for chairs, somebody's arranging for, like, there's gemachs, and I was just thinking, like, what if we could send families that are dealing with, that have just recently found out that their child was sexually abused, what if we could, like, give them a gift certificate so they could bring all their kids out for ice cream? It's such a little, like a silly little thing, but it would make such a difference in terms of giving them some little space. Or families that are dealing with, the police process. So if we could send them away for a weekend to a simmer, the weekend after they have to testify in court, because that's kind of, I mean, it's hellish. It's hellish to have to go through testifying in court. So that's kind of my dream, is to actually take it to the next level, where we're not just like helping people go to the police, but we're actually thinking about what are the broader needs that this family has, and how can we help them kind of start to heal in a more holistic sense.
Mm-hmm. I love that you have that sense of vision and like actually taking specific examples from the community that in previous years, you're right, it does sound ridiculous that, a family with a terminally ill child, like, of course there's tons of support. And I love that you have that vision, even in the thick of things, to say, we have so many resources as the Orthodox community, or as the community at large. We need to be thinking about these victims in a more holistic and comprehensive way. I think that's a really, really beautiful vision. And I know other people will too. And I really hope, for everyone's sake, that in the near future, we were able to together kind of destigmatize this and support those who need our support
Absolutely.
as much as possible. Wow. Thank you so much for all that you guys are doing, and for really sharing a bit of your own personal story, and also the work that you guys are doing. It's really enlightening, and also really important for us to hear. So I really
thank you so much for
the
time, and for your partnership and everything.
Amazing. All right. I look forward to a continued relationship where we're really able to bring in more partners to support this unbelievable work.
Thank you.
This is so not moving.
So much.
Amazing. All right. Have a great day, Shana.
You too. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.